Kyle is a gorgeous 10-year-old German Shepherd. Having been born into a family of ex-police dogs, loyalty has always been very much in his nature. He is now retired from duty and is living out his last days surrounded by beautiful countryside. He lives with a loving couple, the Smiths, who fell in love with him the moment they met him. What Kyle misses most about his years as a police dog is his work buddy and best pal. He needed a plan of action so that he could see him again. Would this be possible? Before we start, can we get this video to 1,000 likes? Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Becoming a police dog isn't an easy task. The training requires hard work and a lot of responsibility. Kyle was thrown in at the deep end. He was a very sweet, innocent dog, so to suddenly have to be planning attack strategies and searching for explosives was quite a shock to the system. Kyle's only issue was that he was perhaps too friendly. He struggled to be aggressive, which is an important trait for a police dog, since it is sometimes necessary. He wasn't capable of carrying out tasks which involved taking down an opponent or fiercely protecting a policeman. He was a kind and gentle soul who wouldn't hurt a fly. This meant he was a little too soft for his job description. He was, however, excellent in other areas. He had an incredible sense of smell, very good eyesight, and he was a fast runner. These are all important traits for a police dog. Kyle's excellence certainly didn't go unnoticed. He earned himself a position on the force as a fully certified police dog. Kyle had several fears when it came to joining the police force. He worried about not being good enough. These worries were keeping him awake at night. That was until he met John. John made Kyle feel instantly at ease. The pair had been selected to work together, and they soon became thick as thieves, forming a very special bond. Kyle formed an attachment with John from the moment he met him, and vice versa. Kyle was put in the care of a lovely family. He wasn't used to the affection they gave him. They showered him with hugs and kisses, which, in the police force, wasn't the norm. It wasn't long after they had taken Kyle and that the woman fell pregnant with her first child. This would be a big change for the family. Dogs can end up attacking newborn babies out of jealousy. Though Kyle was a gentle dog, the couple felt that they couldn't risk it. They contacted the police force and informed them of their decision, hoping that they would find a suitable new family for him to live with. When John was told the news, he had mixed feelings. He was sad at the thought of Kyle being separated from the family that he had grown so accustomed to. On the other hand, he was also very excited. This meant that he could keep Kyle for himself. It didn't take much for John to decide that he would be the one to take Kyle in. That very evening, John took Kyle home with him after work. John did some rearranging in his apartment to ensure that there would be enough space for both Kyle and himself to live comfortably. Kyle was sufficiently qualified so that he knew what to do in every situation. Kyle and John were a very successful partnership. The connection they shared arguably contributed to this success. This meant that they were asked to assist in numerous cases, often playing a big part in solving them. As the years passed, Kyle's skills as a police dog improved immeasurably. This was mostly down to his experience. The more he experienced, the more he grew. He also became better equipped to protect John. This was sometimes a difficult task. Kyle had become so fond of John and vice versa that the pair would consider each other their best friend. At the age of 8, Kyle retired from the service after a successful career serving his country. Kyle was honored for his diligent work and able to relax knowing that he had done a good job. John had always known that this moment would come, but this didn't make it any less painful. The pair had been through so much together. Although it was hard to say goodbye, John knew that it was the right thing to do. The pair shared one more summer holiday together. John was determined to make it special. He threw Kyle a party and took him on a picnic. Kyle had a great time. Kyle was snapped up quickly once he was officially up for adoption. A lovely couple took him in. Their children were almost ready to move out, so they decided that the time was right to get themselves a dog. The couple fell in love with Kyle immediately and spoiled him as much as they could. After living with his new family for a year, Kyle was very happy. While John was irreplaceable, the Smiths, his new owners, took good care of him, and they soon became family to him. He felt at home with them. When the couple's son moved out, this meant that they no longer needed to be living around the city center. They decided to find a new place to live. The couple finally settled on a lovely, spacious old house right in the countryside, away from the busy city. There was plenty of room both in the house and outside it for Kyle to run around. It had a nice big garden. There were also endless places to explore in the surrounding area. Being in the countryside gave Kyle a new lease of life. He had the energy of a young puppy. He loved to explore the surrounding area. There was so much to see. Thomas could hardly keep up with his energy, and Jane didn't even try to. But as time progressed, he became less and less energized. He had even reached a point where he would barely touch his food. Thomas was starting to worry. Thomas and Jane had made the decision to move out to the countryside mainly for Kyle's sake. They wondered whether Kyle might be unwell. Thomas decided that they needed to pay a visit to the vet to get Kyle checked out. They were desperate for answers. He took a thorough physical exam and some tests to try and get to the bottom of the problem. The results showed that Kyle was perfectly healthy and in good shape. Thomas explained that Kyle had been acting bizarrely, not eating much food or wanting to exercise. The vet seemed to be as puzzled by this as Thomas was. They resumed life as normal in the hope that Kyle would soon revert to his old ways. One day shortly afterwards, Kyle and Thomas were on a walk near the edge of the forest when something very strange happened. Kyle seemed to suddenly switch to police dog mode and became rather fierce. He abruptly stopped walking, nose to the ground and ears pricked up and alert. Kyle was always alert. When he caught a whiff of something, he was determined to get to the bottom of it, sniffing around relentlessly. He kept sniffing and then losing the trail soon afterwards. The sniffing would only last a short while before the scent disappeared. Kyle was starting to get suspicious. What could the reason for this be? Kyle was getting impatient and frustrated. He didn't seem to be making any progress at all. Thomas was also getting frustrated with Kyle's behavior. He yelled at him to come back, but to no avail. Thomas couldn't put his finger on what was wrong with Kyle. Thomas didn't know what to do next. He was all out of ideas. He decided to call Kyle's old partner John. He thought that perhaps since he knew Kyle so well and had spent such a long time with him, he might have an idea of why he was behaving in such a way. Thomas placed the call in the hope of finally getting some answers. Upon receiving the call from Kyle's new owner, John's heart skipped a beat. Why would Thomas be calling him? Was something the matter? Was Kyle sick? When Thomas explained everything to John, he was able to offer him an explanation. This is exactly what Thomas had hoped for. John explained that whenever Kyle had caught onto a scent in the past and not been able to find the source of it, he had been trained to sit and wait where the smell was. When Thomas explained to John that Kyle was sitting at the foot of a tree, John instructed him to check it out. He warned him to be careful, as there was a chance that this could be something quite dangerous. Thomas took John's advice and headed to the tree to examine it more closely. He soon noticed that something wasn't right about this tree. The part that Kyle was sitting beside seemed to be broken and slightly caved in. After mulling things over a little, he plucked up the courage to push in the broken part of the tree. When he did this, Kyle seemed quite agitated. He started growling and seemed to be acting all defensive. When Thomas pushed a little more, he observed that there was a lot of space inside the tree. When he realized what was buried inside the tree, Thomas got the scare of his life. It felt as though a human skeleton was hidden inside the tree. He couldn't be certain since he hadn't actually seen it, but he was convinced that he wasn't imagining things. Afraid that he might be tampering with a crime scene, Thomas left the tree alone. Without a moment's hesitation, Thomas gave John another call, his hands shaking as he dialed the number. His voice trembled as he explained to Thomas what he had discovered. John was shocked at what he heard. John sprang into action, gathering a couple of forensic experts to investigate the scene. As soon as John and the forensic team had arrived at the scene, Kyle came bounding over to John, ecstatic at the sight of his old owner and best friend. He jumped up and down, licking him all over. John was equally as happy to see Kyle. This was the first time the pair had seen each other since Kyle's new owners had moved to the countryside. John rushed over to the tree and pulled back the broken bark to reveal a human skeleton hidden inside. Thomas was right. What an incredible discovery! John couldn't believe what they had discovered. He was about to contact his chief officer to report what they had found, but the forensics stopped him before he went any further. They wanted to figure out where this skeleton had come from before reporting it to their boss. The forensics had a sneaky suspicion that this skeleton wasn't a real skeleton, but a fake one. They were correct. Upon closer inspection, they'd realized that it was simply a Halloween decoration. It had definitely done its job in scaring them. They decided that this must have been some kind of prank, placed there by a local in an attempt to scare someone. The prank had certainly been a success. While John was relieved that this wasn't a real human skeleton, he was also slightly surprised at Kyle's reaction. Kyle had been adequately trained to identify whether or not something was dangerous. Why had Kyle reacted in such a way to discovering a fake skeleton? Since the case was now closed and John had done what he had come to do, Kyle was back to jumping up at his best friend. Looking down at the happy dog, it suddenly dawned on John that perhaps this hadn't really been about the skeleton after all. In all their years of working together, Kyle knew what the best way to get John's attention was. At work, whenever Kyle had exhibited this kind of behavior, John would immediately rush to his aid. John was sure that this had been an intentional plan on Kyle's part to get John down here. John bent down and affectionately stroked Kyle's fur. He looked intently into Kyle's big brown eyes, and his suspicions were confirmed. Kyle had clearly been missing John a lot. This was a desperate attempt to see him again. John was very moved by this. He knew that dogs were loyal, but this was another level. Kyle obviously missed him more than he realized. Before leaving, John took Kyle on a short walk around the woods so that the pair could spend some time alone together. He could see how happy Kyle was to be in his company. In that moment, John vowed to himself that he would make the effort to come and see his furry friend as often as he could. This was a promise he would stick to.